Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest, absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, Southern Appalachian Herbs at blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. It's a little breezy out here today, but it's too pretty a day to be inside. It's one of those just beautiful early June days, and the birds are singing, the sun's shining, and everything's green, and it's just really nice. So if it gets a little rustly every now and then, just bear with me. I'm sure it'll even out in just a second. So today's show is going to be, well, it's going to be very different than last week's show. It's going to be a lot about herbs and foraging. But also, I may be a little different because I was awake all night with a sick border collie. But I think I can handle this one all right. I want to talk a little bit today about foraging to start with, and then I'm going to get into a really interesting herb that everyone needs to know about and have on hand. See, this time of year, the early spring foraging, the early herbs and wild edibles has just passed. They're what we call the ephemerals. The ephemerals are a classification of wild plants. They're usually small. Uh, they come up first, and they don't last very long. Um, Trillium flowers are a good example. Ramps are the best example. Ramps come up in April. They may last a couple of weeks into May, just kind of depending on the orientation of your slope and how close they are to the creek, and then they're gone. Those are ephemerals. They just come and go very quickly. But this time of year, a lot of our more, I'd say, durable wild foods are very much in season. Right now, the poke greens are up, and I think they're tastier this year than ever before. Y'all know I'm a big fan of pokeweed. It is an edible green that has a taste somewhere between, I'd say, spinach and sweet garden peas. Just delicious. And I mean the raw sweet garden peas, sugar snaps, ones that are just so good to just eat, straight out of the garden. Um, as I always say, poke is slightly toxic. Most guidebooks say boil in 3 changes of water, then fry in fat. Yeah, I never do anything like that. I, I actually eat them raw, which most people would strongly warn against. But follow everyone else's advice if you're going to do it. Don't follow my example. I think a simple, you know, 1 change of water and then fry up in fat would be the furthest I'd go along those lines. But then I've been eating them for a long time, and I may just well have built up a tolerance to the toxin. Other plants that are coming up, certainly the dandelions. This is the time for dandelions. The greens will be less bitter this time of year than later in the summer. That's true of most greens, and probably every green actually. When the weather gets hot and they start to form flowers and seeds, the leaves turn bitter. So that's what we call bolting in gardening terms. You plant old radishes, mustard, certainly collards, beets. I mean, various plants, especially in the cruciferous vegetables or lettuces as well. They will, when the weather gets hot enough, they will form a seed. Broccoli is notorious for bolting too early. And when that happens, the plant puts all its energy into the flower and the seed, and the leaves will be less desirable, especially in certain cases, um, such as mustard and, like I said, broccoli and such. But right now, everything's just perfect. I mean, the poke's coming in. Wild lettuce is starting to come in very well. Wild lettuce is the ancestor to our modern lettuce. It's a bitter, tall, upright lettuce that looks absolutely nothing like head lettuce. It does not look like iceberg at all. You have regular wild lettuce and prickly wild lettuce. You can easily find a picture of it online. You know what? I'll let that be the picture for this week's podcast. It'll be wild lettuce because it's pretty much everywhere. It's considered a weed, and it has really unique herbal medicinal qualities. If you cut the stalk of wild lettuce, a milky sap, so to speak, will come up. You can collect that, and more will come up, and more will come up until the plant's exhausted. But you will end up with no, I don't know, maybe a fourth of an ounce from a large plant. Probably take a couple plants to actually get that much of this resin, this milky substance, which will dry dark, and it has an opiate-like pain relieving quality for about 50% of people. Throughout the history of herbalism, it was considered a feeble opiate, meaning it would deaden pain and help with sleep, but in a very mild way. For half the population, it does not work at all. It's just a person's body chemistry. You can also harvest the whole plant and tincture it. You don't have to do that laborious task of bringing out the sap, or you can just pick the leaves when they're nice and fresh and young and eat them in a salad, or cook them and have them as a cooked grain. There are actually very many, especially in France, lettuce soups. When you got a lot of lettuce coming in and you got to use it, actually making a soup of it is a very good thing to do. It's usually a soup made with some cream, a little nutmeg, chicken broth, really very pleasant and nice. It's a good spring soup. Another traditional spring green that's often used in soups, especially in England, is sorrel. Sorrel soup is just very common. So is nettle. The nettles are coming up right now. Sorrels, they're a large family. Sorrels and docks are very similar. Both of these plants essentially taste like spinach with lemon juice already squirted on it. Really some of my favorites. I eat a lot of sorrels and a lot of docks. The most commonly known sorrel is wood sorrel that looks like shamrock. Actually has a very pretty pink flower, sometimes a yellow flower. I saw some pink flowering when I was down the mountain the other day. And that you'll find that all over the place. Clovers are coming in. Clovers are edible, very mild, not really anything to jump up and down about until they flower. Then the flower makes a very nice addition to a salad. Has some estrogenic qualities, so I don't eat a lot of it, but it's very medicinal as well, especially good for menopausal type issues and various women's issues. It also promotes sleep. It can help with asthma as well. You can make a tea out of it or just throw it in the salad and eat it. Throw it in the soup and eat it. Eat it just raw as you're walking through the field, which is what I always do. I like to eat my herbs whenever possible. Another one coming in right now is yucca flowers. Yucca is that spiky plant that was sort of the bane of my existence when I was a kid trying to cut the grass at my grandparents' farm. My grandfather liked using yuccas as ornamental plants, and I was always running into one, and they stick in you, and they really are quite painful. The flower is fairly large. I'd say about the size of a silver dollar. It's a thick, fleshy flower, and you can eat it raw. You can put it in a salad, or you can cook it. Cook it with some butter. It's pretty good. The interesting thing about it is it has a rich but mild. It's very mild tasting. It has no bitterness. I wouldn't even call it very sweet. Maybe a slight hint of sweetness. It's got a rich taste to it, and one of the main reasons for that is the saponin content. Saponin in plants is very important from a survival standpoint. For instance, the yucca root is much higher in saponin than the yucca flowers, and in terms of survival, you take that root and crush it up and mix with water, and it froths. It becomes a soap, and you can use that soap to clean your hands and clean wounds and everything you would need to use a soap for. But Native Americans especially would use that same saponin, that same water full of the saponins from the root, as a fish poison. You put it in still water in a pond, and it prevents the fish's gills from absorbing a certain percentage of oxygen. So they stop swimming and start to float toward the top. It's a temporary stunning effect, essentially. And, the great conservationists, the Native Americans, would go out and just scoop up all the fish they needed at one shot. Now, of course, that is totally illegal now. Totally illegal. You will go to jail if a wildlife officer, a park ranger, even a cop, anybody enforcing the law catches you doing that. So, but in a survival situation, it's a good thing to tuck away and have in the back of your mind. Those flowers contain very small amounts of the saponin, and that actually gives the mouthfeel, the texture of the flower. Um, I guess you could say it was slightly waxy, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it more like white chocolate. So it actually adds a richness to a salad if you're eating it that way, and it makes it very good as a cooked vegetable. This time of year, I start looking for shepherd's purse. Shepherd's purse is another green. It's much like wild mustard, and the wild mustard is, depending on where you live, has either just gone to flower or is about to go to flower. Wild mustard, I like it all the time. I mean, I don't mind if wild mustard has bolted. It's peppery and hot, and it's just a really good, bold green. It may be a little too strong for some people's taste, but I'm a mustard fanatic. The main thing when you see the wild mustard blooming is to make note of where it is, because when it goes to seed, you collect those seeds, and you can make the condiment mustard. The mustard you spread on a hot dog. It's delicious. The wild mustard is far more potent and far more hot and flavorful, horseradish-like, than cultivated mustard seed. It has a lot of interesting flavors, just depending on the plant and where it's grown. It is so easy to make mustard. You can literally just take the seeds and cover them in vinegar, let them absorb the vinegar, and eat it just like that, with a little salt. I mean, that's as simple as can be, right? You can use vinegar and a little wine, white wine, and do a Dijon style mustard. You would add a little more salt to that because the Dijon mustard is a salty mustard. You can add horseradish to it. Uh, Crush the seeds up a little bit with a mortar and pestle, or run them through a coffee grinder if you want a really fine. I like more of a rough, chunky, some whole seeds, some a little crushed, some partial, and do a bold German style mustard. You can do beer mustards. You can do tarragon mustards. The herb tarragon pairs wonderfully well with mustard. So that's definitely one to look for. But also this time of year, we can be gathering the herbs we're going to need for allergies and colds late summer into fall and into the cold season. If we get enough, we can have them on hand for spring allergies too. And I mentioned this before. I'll just run through it again. This is my allergy formula. This is what I use. And this is the time of year to start looking for it. Okay. Mimosa blossoms. Mimosa is a plant that does not grow where I live. I'm too high up in the mountains. I have to go down to places like Wilkesboro and Marion and Lenore, or over into Tennessee around Elizabeth and Johnson City. I have to go down the mountain to under 1,000 feet elevation before I find mimosas. But the blossoms and the tender leaves, you only need, I would say, 2 ounces would last you for an entire year. Um, they have several interesting effects. They actually have a slightly calming, a slightly narcotic effect. They can help with pain and sleep. But as far as allergies, they reduced mast cells, M-A-S-T. Mast cells are the cells that are the receptors for histamine. So when you have an allergic reaction, your body produces histamines. The histamines attach to a mast cell, and you have an allergic reaction. Very simple way of looking at it. But the more histamine your body produces, the more mast cells it will produce as well. So your allergies tend to get more severe throughout the season or as you get older, and you start developing new allergies just because your immune system is overreacting and your body is becoming just crazily inflamed with allergies, essentially. So that's one. And likewise, stinging nettle. I mentioned nettles a few minutes ago as a very common soup in Europe. Uh, Nettles are used for tea and soups and eaten cooked, and nettles are just a very common wild food. in more traditional cultures than we have in the United States, but here in the Appalachians, they're definitely still sought after by many people. I grow my own nettles, and I look for them in the wild because I don't think you can have too much nettles. Uh, you Stinging nettles are actually the most nutritious vegetable food there is, except for perhaps moringa, which absolutely will not grow where I live. Moringa is a tropical plant. Um, but stinging nettles are the highest in minerals of all the greens, and they also have that mast cell reducing quality. I add to that ragweed. Yes, the weed that causes most people's fall allergies. The flower, the pollen of ragweed, is what causes the allergy. The leaf of ragweed is one of the best antihistamine herbs there is. It's also a nice bitter. Um, it's coincidental that the most common version of ragweed, which is Ambrosia artemisiaefolia, if memory serves. And what that means, ambrosia, for some odd reason, is the ragweed family. No one knows how it got that name. In ancient mythology, ambrosia was like the food of the gods. It was supposed to be the most delicious thing there was. Well, ragweed is actually extremely bitter. And artemisiaefolia means that the leaves look like wormwood. So this is ambrosia with leaves that look like wormwood, which also just happens to be as bitter as wormwood. So I think that's an interesting little doctrine of signatures kind of thing. The doctrine of signatures is where uh, many of the ancient herbalists believe that God designed the plants so that when we looked at them, we knew what their use would be. A yellow plant might be good for the liver, for instance. Well, ambrosia artemisiaefolia is a ragweed that looks and tastes a lot like wormwood. And it is bitter. It's a good digestive stimulant. It has a lot of good properties, but it is the best of our antihistamine herbs. It is the most effective, and it is literally everywhere. There's also giant ragweed, which is common in the mountains where I live. Look for ragweed at the edges of fields and pastures. You can find nettles like sort of edge spaces as well. They don't want to be deep in the woods, and they don't want to be out in full sun usually, but sometimes you'll see the patch go, well out in the full sun. But when you're looking for ragweed, a lot of times it will be growing by a roadside or by a cultivated field. For instance, I remember last year about this time I was down in Bladen County, North Carolina, and ragweed was growing just thick as could be in the ditches by all the corn and cotton fields. Don't harvest it from there. Okay, that's very tempting, whether by the roadside or a field like that, but those plants will be contaminated from runoff from the road and chemicals that are sprayed on the crop. So a little bit of a bummer, but it's a good place to learn to identify it, and then you start seeing it all over the place because it is a weed. It's going to be everywhere, right? So lastly, well, kind of lastly in that combination is mullein. Mullein is an herb that has some of those same antihistamine mast cell reducing properties that is specifically good for the lungs. And this is the time to start looking for mullein. I know right now if I were to go down, say, anywhere east of Charlotte, the mullein would already be in bloom. In the mountains, it'll be another 3 to 4 weeks. And mullein is a tall plant. It can grow 7 feet tall. It has fuzzy, soft leaves and a spike of yellow flowers, often called Aaron's rod or cowboy toilet paper because the leaves are so soft. Mullein is one of the very best herbs to harvest yourself. Again, it grows often in waste places and contaminated areas. So, I really do like to harvest mullein in the mountains where I live, where I know the soil and the water and the air is clean, and it's really good. A lot of people use mullein as specifically for asthma and bronchitis. You can make an oil of the flowers. It's good for ear infections. Just a really, really helpful herb. Those are the four main antihistamine herbs I use in my tincture. I take about an ounce of each dried, put it in a half-gallon pickle jar, and pour as much of a half gallon of inexpensive vodka over it as the jar will hold. Put the lid on it, put it in a dark place, shake it up every day for about 30 days, And just a little half a shot glass full, a tablespoonful, whatever that a day really does keep my allergies very well under control when I have it on hand. I'm actually a little stuffy today because I don't have it in hand. I did not make enough last year, and I hope to remedy that this year by making a lot more. I also add to that one other herb that I failed to mention, and it's thyme. The reason for that is my allergies tend to be specifically bronchial allergies. I get congested, and thyme is an excellent um, expectorant. Helps keep, break up and relieve the mucus congestion from the lungs. It's also antiseptic, antibacterial, antiviral. Um, Thyme's just a really good herb to use in tincture form. I mean, we rarely use enough thyme in cooking to get its full effect. Thyme can really help keep us healthy and has some good affects on mental clarity and such too. Thyme is a really important herb that's one of those that's definitely not just a culinary herb, one we really should be using all the time. But the herb I really wanted to focus on today is an herb that we definitely want to have on hand for the cold and flu season. And it's an herb of a really interesting history. It's a Native American herb that is very similar to another herb used in Europe. These herbs have been used for thousands of years, specifically for viral fevers. And it has shown to have some very good antiviral properties. In this age of pandemics and we don't know what's coming next, we really need to have these antiviral herbs on hand. And Boneset is one of the most studied, most tried and true, most reliable home remedies for viral infections, especially those that have severe fevers associated with them. The name Boneset makes it a little confusing. Most people would think Boneset would help heal broken bones, but it doesn't. Now, comfrey will. Comfrey is the herb you want to turn to for broken bones and really any tissue injury, even arthritic joints. Boneset gets its name because in early America, there were several viruses, really bad viral epidemics that went around. I mean, European and British and Celtic, etc., settlers that came to America brought with them their own viruses from Europe, and when they got here, they encountered new viruses. And so there were yellow fever epidemics, there were typhoid epidemics. I mean, there were malaria. Malaria was constant. And several of these viruses had severe fevers, and you've experienced something similar if you've had a bad flu, where you're aching so bad from the fever it feels like it could break your bones. Your muscles are cramping and everything is just really painful. Those epidemics at the time, we're talking mid 1700s, were called break bone fevers. And boneset was the herb used to help with break bone fevers. It was introduced to the settlers by Native Americans. I, if I remember correctly, the Iroquois may have been the ones that introduced this one to New England, but it was also used in the Virginia colonies. So it was really widespread throughout Native American tribes. It's very common. I can probably walk out my door and go to any trail around the nearest pond and harvest boneset most of the year. It's a weed. It's Eupatorium perfoliatum. Eupatorium, also called ague weed. Ague is an old word for fever or fever work or sweating plant. Kind of tells you what it does. It's a diaphoretic or a febrifuge. Essentially, it helps break a fever. Instead of, well, of course, our ancestors didn't have two aspirin or two Tylenol or whatever. They couldn't just take a couple of pills when they had a bad fever. And really, that's not the best thing to do in many instances in a viral infection. I mean, you know, small children, infants can be very quickly and severely harmed by a high fever. Elderly, weak people, people with autoimmune conditions, bad fevers can be very dangerous. For a regular healthy person, the fever is your body's way of helping to kill the virus. And so by letting the fever run its course, you help your immune system fight off the virus. What these herbs do in these, fever breaking herbs, they quicken the course of it. They help you sweat it out faster. They help the fever break, come to its peak, and resolve itself. And you've been through that before. I mean, you know, when you've had the flu or a really bad cold, when you've been really fevered and you get under a blanket and then you sweat and you fall asleep and you wake up feeling so much better. These herbs help do that. And there's so many really that do. I mean, I've mentioned before that there are hot teas you can make from spices such as, cinnamon and turmeric and cloves that can help do that. Hot baths, um, especially with ginger in the bath water actually. Um, our ancestors used to use mustard plasters, the same mustard seed I was just talking about, to make as a condiment. It's very hot. It would warm the skin. They put it on the skin under a plaster of some sort. That may have been, brown paper, goose fat, a very common English remedy to help break especially a chest cold, because they put the goose fat and probably some mustard or ginger and brown paper over the sick person's chest, and it would increase the body temperature, induce sweating, and help break up the congestion in the lungs at the same time. Now, obviously, those such herbs could irritate the skin, could actually cause blistering if used for too long. A lot of people just got under a bunch of blankets and opened a window to get some cold, fresh air. All these things work, but these herbs that can be taken as teas are a lot more convenient and less messy than a lot of the old home remedies. But also, Boneset was found to be particularly effective. Now, Dioscorides knew of eupatorium. As I said, there's a Boneset in North America. There's a very similar uh, eupatorium in Europe. And so this actually has use going back to, at least the ancient Greeks, if not further. So, and in the history of the name of this herb, the Latin name eupatorium is derived from Jupiter. Jupiter or Eupator, or however you pronounce it, was the king of Pontus in the first century. And he was apparently a really great herbalist. He was one of the leading herbalists of, over 2,000 years ago. And eupatorium was one of the herbs he used. But it really was not, I would say, popularized until around 1800, when the Native American version found a lot of use in early America as these epidemics were sweeping through. It was used in early patent medicines, the cough syrups and cold remedies that were sold before the Pure Foods and Drug Act. This really would have been one of our most popular herbs in the United States for a good 200 years. I don't think any household would have gone into fall without having some boneset dried and ready for home use. Miss Grieve, who wrote A Modern Herbal, which is really the best summary of the British herbal tradition, tells us that in her time of about 1931, when she wrote the book, it really wasn't a very popular herb in England. It was really considered to be an American herb. She said boneset was a favorite medicine of the North American Indians, who called it by a name that is equivalent to ague weed or fever weed, and has been a popular remedy in the United States. Probably no plant in American domestic practice having more extensive and frequent use. That's kind of amazing. I mean, it was no plant had more use in American herbalism. She said it was stimulant, febrifuge, and laxative, so breaks fever. You know what laxative is. And, also stimulates the appetite. Acts slowly but persistently, and its greatest power was manifested upon the stomach, liver, bowels, and uterus. That is regarded as a mild tonic in moderate doses, and it's diaphoretic, meaning it breaks the fever, more especially when taken as a warm infusion. That's a hot tea. Maybe one of the reasons we don't necessarily recognize the power of boneset anymore, not only because it's so common that it's hard for people to make a living selling it. I mean, it's kind of hard for people to market a product you can just walk out and to the nearest wild spot around your house and gather for free. A lot of herbalists have just really gotten away from tea. So often we only think in terms of tinctures and capsules, and well, tea is really what our ancestors used, especially in early America and in the British tradition. Whereas in, say, Germanic folk medicine, monastic medicine, they would have used tea just as much, but as opposed to tinctures, they would have infused these herbs in wine. She said it was specifically good for influenza and with congestion. Resources of the Southern Fields and Forests, which I always reference. It's one of the very best books ever written on uses of plants in America, written in the 1860s as the Confederacy tried to replace all imported medicines, foods, everything. Written by a botanist. He said a warm infusion of this plant is emetic, sudorific, and diaphoretic. And in early American herbalism, they were particularly interested in herbs that could make you throw up. I mean, ipecac, lobelia, etc. And they thought it was very good to purge and cleanse the system. So that would have been a particular interest in the 1860s. And you got to admit, I mean, the water wasn't always very clean, and this was before refrigeration, pasteurization, and sometimes people really did have to throw up. Sudorific means it helps with sleep, and the diaphoretic again is referring to the inducing of the sweating, helping you break that fever. And employed cold as opposed to a warm tea, it was tonic and febrifuge, so it would help lower the fever and stimulate appetite. And he said also that small quantities of cold infusion, cold tea, would act as a laxative. So again, we're seeing, very similar use from England in the 1830s to the American South in the 1860s. There were many, many formulas where Boneset was combined with wintergreen or birch leaves and twigs, willow. Birch and willow have salicin that also helps lower a fever. King's Medical Dispensatory of 1898 was where you go for the official use in American medicine at this time. They said it's a well-known plant growing in low grounds in the borders of swamps, streams, etc. Like I said, I usually find it growing near a pond. There's a very popular hiking trail around a lake not far from my house, and boneset is just everywhere. I mean, probably the primary wildflower growing beside that lake. And King said it is a very valuable medicinal agent. The cold infusion or extract is tonic and aperient, warm infusion diaphoretic and emetic. As a tonic, it is useful in remittent, intermittent, and typhoid fevers. Now, these were the fevers they were so concerned about this time because the malarial fever would come around every so many days. Some people would have the fever every 4 days. For instance, Sir Walter Raleigh, who founded the first colony here in North Carolina, the first colony in the United States, um, he fell out of favor with the British royalty after a time. He went from being one of the great stars of England to what they considered somewhat of a scoundrel due to a marital affair and certain other things. He had once been considered the greatest gentleman in the entire kingdom, by the way. Um, he had malaria, and his fever was every 4 days. And it was so predictable that when he was condemned to be beheaded, he requested the time of his beheading to be before the next fever came on. So these were, really strong fevers and really strong viruses. And a lot of what we found about COVID-19, a lot of the treatments that have been effective for it have been very similar to those that were used for malaria. So again, I'm not recommending anyone take any herb, treat any disease. I've had COVID twice. I had the first one, and then I had that Delta variant or whatever it was. A very bad cold, and if you're weak and sick, it's going to hit you a lot harder than if you're healthy. But boneset is definitely an herb I keep on hand. I don't have any right now. Actually, I'm out. I have to go gather some. But I would have on hand for that very purpose, along with sweet Annie, along with a few other herbs. For me, one I would use is tulip poplar, liriodendron, or even dogwood. Both of them have quinine-type properties in the bark. I like tulip poplar a little bit better for cough and congestion. Another good bark is black cherry, wild cherry. Those are two barks I use, but boneset definitely one to have on hand. I've been through a whole show on antiviral herbs just recently. Look back on that. There's some really good ones. I mean, there's cat's claw vine if you live where that grows, or if you want to order some. There's licorice, angelica, specifically good for the lungs. There's Hotunia, Osha, various herbs. Various herbs are very useful, especially for bad respiratory viruses. And I would definitely keep Boneset on hand, and Joe Pye weed, which can somewhat be used interchangeably. I'll get into that very soon. I'll talk about all about Joe Pye weed. That's another one of America's first, great Native American antiviral, anti-fever remedies that really important part of the history of American herbalism, as well as being very useful today. But King's Medical Dispensatory did stress small doses of the tea because otherwise it would cause vomiting or have a strong laxative effect, what they called purgative back then. As recently as the 1990s, early 2000s, the late herbalist Michael Moore recommended Boneset for any viral inflammation with fever in the bones and muscles. He recommended it as a diaphoretic for people who are moist and humid, part of his system of herbal energetics, and said it was best for quick onset viruses, good for painful urination, and a mucous membrane tonic. That's from his book, Specific Indications for Herbs in General Use. He went on to say in that same volume, specific indication, head cold, moist with fever, aches, acute hot dry bronchitis, muscular weakness, influenza with malaise and aches, acute bronchial pneumonia, and to stimulate innate immunity. This is also an herb that's considered immunostimulative. Um, Most recently, I guess I'm going to look at Plants for a Future. Plants for a Future says Boneset, or as it's called in England sometimes thoroughwort, is one of the most popular domestic medicines in North America, where it has been used in the treatment of influenza, colds, acute bronchitis, catarrh, which means congestion, and skin diseases. It has been shown to stimulate resistance to viral and bacterial infections and reduces fevers by encouraging sweating. The plant, however, should be used with some caution since large doses are a laxative and emetic, and the plant might contain potentially liver-harming pyrrolizidine alkaloids. That would be in large doses. Again, if you have a concern with cancer, always heed such warnings. Not having any family history of cancer or any reason to be concerned, I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to them. But, that's my little caveat. If you have a concern, always do your research and err on the side of caution, without a doubt. The leaves and flowering stems are antispasmodic, cholagogue, diaphoretic, emetic, febrifuge, laxative, purgative, stimulant, and a vasodilator. A hot infusion of the dried leaves and flowers is used as a very effective treatment to bring relief to symptoms of the common cold and other similar feverages. It loosens phlegm and promotes the removal through coughing. The herb is practically unequaled in its effectiveness against colds. Now, that is a strong statement, especially from Plants for the Future, which tends to always kind of err on the side of caution and downplay things. Let me read that again. The herb is practically unequaled in its effectiveness against cold. It is also used in the treatment of rheumatic illnesses, skin conditions, and worms. The leaves and flowering stems are harvested in the summer before the buds open and are dried for later use. It's also used in a homeopathic remedy for flu and fever. In fact, let's see, I went to the National Center for Homeopathy, and literally the uses for Boneset were too numerous to list. If you're interested in that, just look up National Center for Homeopathy and look under Medicine Finder Eupatorium perfoliatum, and you will be amazed how much use this herb has in homeopathy. Now, it's a weedy herb. Like I said, you can find in the wild. It's super easy to cultivate in the garden. You can get a few seeds, put it in an area where the soil's not going to dry out, but it's not going to be boggy either. It doesn't like wet feet. It's usually found at the edge of a pond or the edge of a swampy area. it really takes care of itself. This is when you want to plant in the fall. The seeds need to stratify over winter in the ground, freeze and thaw, and it will come up in the spring, and from then on it should just self-seed. And considering that acetaminophen is being banned in most European countries because it is shown as the leading cause of liver damage in European countries. In America, we turn a blind eye to it because it's a byproduct of the petroleum industry, and between the pharmaceutical industry and the petroleum industry, no one has an incentive to ban Tylenol. In European countries where they have different priorities, and in Asia, they're really casting a harsh eye on acetaminophen. Now, I'm not degrading that company or whatever. I choose not to use acetaminophen. And before I take, 2 Tylenol and call my doctor in the morning, I'm going to fire my doctor and harvest some Boneset and have that on hand when I have a cold with a fever. And honestly, as I've said before, if you go to your local drugstore and look at all cold and flu products, every single one of them, instead of having relatively safe aspirin, they all have acetaminophen in them. So I think this is a very, very important herb to have on hand, especially in this day and age and not knowing what's coming around the bend. And this is the time of year to start looking for it. Like you said, harvest when in flower. We're in June. In the next 3 weeks, it's going to be coming into flower, at least, depending on where you live. Around here, I'm going to be looking for it end of June going into July. You all have a great week. Enjoy this beautiful weather. I hope it's nice where you are. Just down, I was looking at a forecast. Actually, a friend sent me a link just down the mountain from me. Not that far away. Next week they're calling for temperatures over 100 degrees. So I'm going to be really glad to be in the mountains in North Carolina at about 5,000 feet elevation with my feet in a cold trout stream and a fly rod in my hand and an eye out for these nice wild herbs and edibles. I hope you get to enjoy something similar. And, if you can't and you don't, uh, you know, maybe it's time to start thinking about moving out of the city. Things are not going to get any better anytime soon in cities. As we discussed last week, I have every reason to believe they're going to get a whole lot worse. But let's end on a good note. Let's end on a high note. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, for your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.